Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to part 2 of my Alice Junk Journal tutorial. Today we'll be taking a look at gathering our papers and putting together our signatures that we are going to eventually bind into this book that you see here. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so just to give you an idea about time frame, it's been about a half an hour that I've been sitting here deconstructing books. So, of course, I was watching some YouTube while I did it, but here is all of the signatures that I got removed from the main book. And you can see there's a lot of them here. So I got about half the book done. These are all of the loose pages, or the pages that were glued in. So the outside of each signature that was glued in. I don't know. I'm going to go through these and see if there's anything in here that I really want to keep to use in this book, because I have so much of these wonderful full spread pages here that are intact that I'm probably going to primarily use these. I'm probably not going to use these, but I will hang on to them. And as you can see, like, I didn't even do the whole book. This is what's left. As you pull them away, you can see here now how you can see each signature in there, and you can see where the stitches are, and you can see the glue that's been adhered. So all of these outside pages, that's where the glue adheres to, is that one outside page. And then this was the remnants of the book mesh that they lay over the top of it. You can kind of see it there. It's like a web, and that gets glued in as well. So you can kind of see where it is here. You can see their markings as well that they use to ensure that each signature ends up in the right place. Kind of interesting just to see a book from this perspective. But as you can see, I did the first 800 some odd pages. There's still, because this was a rather large book, it had over 1,000 pages, so there's still quite a bit here, and I'm just going to hang on to this because I can deconstruct those later if I need more, but this is more than enough to work with. I mean, I could do a dozen books with what's here. So I just wanted to show you that. And this was the other book that we deconstructed, the one that's glue bound in, so you can't really pull it apart in these nice signatures like I've done with this one. So what I did was I basically just pulled out all of the color illustrations, and as we create the book, I will show you how I will actually, some of these I will be able to put together to keep face up. Some of them I will cut out and paste onto other papers, and some of them we may put in sideways. So we'll work with a variety of these. I did also pull out a couple of the single sheets of the black and white pages, just for some of the images that I like that I might want to incorporate throughout the book. So I only did a handful of those. So I have a handful of pages that I pulled out black and white, and then I have all the color illustrations, and then again, here's what's left of the book. There's still a lot of great illustrations in here, but since I am using these primarily, I don't really need to pull out a ton of black and white illustrations because there are a bunch of them in here. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to basically create the signatures, the insides that are going to go in. So in general, I am working with a book that is about this size. I don't like to go a whole lot bigger than this because you start to run into the problem where your pages are not going to be big enough to fold in half. What I mean by that is if we took a book that's this big, right? And this is a tiny bit bigger than this one. Not much. It's not any taller. It's just a little bit wider. But it is, as you can see, a little bit taller than this. So the issue that you run across, if you start using books that are really big, while they make for these really great big journals, it gets hard to find pages that will be big enough to fit in there. So this book the pages are approximately a half sheet folded, or a sheet of paper folded in half. So that is what, 5 inches by 8 inches roughly. So you can take a basic blank sheet of paper, you can fold it in half, and that essentially will make the right size page for your book. That makes it a whole lot easier for you to add extra pages, to add journaling pages and that kind of thing into a book. Your scrapbooking papers will always be big enough because you can cut them down. Even if you use some of these bigger sheets, you know, if you fold these in half, you can still cut them down and get them in there. So when you start getting books that are super big, like this one, this is a pretty sizable cover. I wouldn't be able to take an 8.5 by 11 and fit it in there. It's not going to fit. It's not going to be tall enough. Now, while I don't mind having a variety of, I don't know that I actually put any in here. So you can see here, I don't mind having a variety of widths because it creates a nice layered effect. But in general, you want the majority of your pages to fit, you know, your height and width of the book that you're using. So for this one, this would be a rather large one. So even these pages aren't going to be wide enough. So if I were to take these pages and sew them into this book, I'm going to have a good few inches that's hanging off over the side that I'm going to have to fill in with other pages, or, you know, just leave this big gaping section over here, which would just be weird. So that's just one thing to think about when you're choosing your books. I try to keep them as close to a regular size 8.5 by 11 sheet folded in half. So I try to keep them about 8 by 5 inches in general. So I'm generally looking for hardback books that are around that size. And I can tell you that a great place to get hardback books to use to deconstruct is like your dollar store. At least that's what they're called here in the US. And I can buy, you know, a hardback book for $1, take the insides out, and I've got a great base for my cover. So that's generally what I'm looking for when I'm talking about covers. So these are basically 8.5 by 11 just regular sheets of colored paper. So if you can see, if I can take one of these and fold it in half, because again, I'm making I'm making signatures. I need this bend, this center point to sew into. So if I fold this in half, you can see here that in this book, they are going to be a little bit smaller, which is okay because we do get that layered effect, but you wouldn't want the whole book to be this way because then you just have these big gaping open sections throughout your book. So with this, I'm going to use these as my base, and if you can use the book, the insides that came with the book is always great, but you don't necessarily have to. A lot of times when I use, particularly when I'm pulling like books from like the dollar store or whatever, you know, I don't use the inside of those books for anything. Most of the time they get recycled. So in general, I just recycle those. But in this case, I am going to use a lot of what came in this book. So I want to make sure that my pages are fairly close to this size, the rest of the pages that I'm going to put in. So at this point, now what we're going to do is decide how many signatures we need in the book. So again, like I said, your signatures are your 3 sections, and you sew them in sections because there's no way you could sew, you know, there's like 100 some odd pages in here. There's no way you could sew that into one flat thing and then it would actually be anything you could even get a needle through probably, and it wouldn't lay flat. That's why you see in the books, they do signatures of 8 pages in general. These are all 8-page signatures. When you fold them in half, it makes 16 pages, but they lay nice and flat together. And then you sew all those. And then again, like I mentioned, you sew all those together and those get put into the binding, and that's what creates your book. Most books are created in this fashion. So for this one is a 3 signature with roughly 100 some odd pages. But as you can see, this binding is quite a bit smaller than this one. Like I could fit this book in here and it'll fit around. So that means that I need at least 3 signatures, possibly 4 in this book in order to make it so that my binding doesn't end up going like this. Because if you don't put enough signatures, enough pages in your book, you're going to get this sort of collapsing going on. Now you don't want to fill the whole thing. You can see there's still some space in here. You don't want to fill the entire journal with pages, as in you don't want the whole thing to be like completely overflowing with pages so that your book, that the book block that you are essentially making is bigger than your binding. So you want to keep your book block smaller than your binding, for one, so that your cover will close, and 2, you want to leave some space so that you can add to it. Like the whole point of making this book is that it's going to be a journal, so I'm going to be writing in it. I'm going to be, you know, pasting printouts of the deck in there. I'm going to be adding my own notes, adding inserts, adding things of that nature. So I want to make sure I leave room and I compensate for that. So I'm going to do, I think what I'm going to do is try to do maybe, let's see, this is 3 and that pretty well fills it out, but we have a pretty thick cover in there. Now I don't like to do, you might think maybe I should do 4, but I don't like to do 4 because it's harder to determine a center point to, then your center point for your binding ends up being between 2 of the signatures rather using this middle signature as an anchor point. And again, that will make more sense when we get to the actual binding. So I tend to try and do my signatures in odd numbers, 3, 5, so that I always get that one of them will be in the center and everything can evenly spread out from there, if that makes sense. Hopefully all of this is making sense. So I really don't want to do 4 for that particular reason. So I think I'm going to do 3 and we'll just have to make them a little bit chunkier signatures than maybe I would normally do because there's a lot of space here to fill. If you don't fill enough, if you don't get enough in here, you won't have stability for your binding. I mean, this is a pretty stable book, but it will, if we don't get enough in here to support this, it will eventually collapse on you. So that's why we kind of want to be careful about how much we actually put in there. Okay, so all of that aside, now we get to the point of we are actually going to take pages and build our signatures. So I tend to do them kind of all 3 at once, and that'll make more sense as we go through the process. So I like to divide things up. I'm going to do 3 signatures. So I'm going to move all of this stuff out of the way. So what I'm going to do is make 3 piles of the papers that I want to include in each signature. Now I know I want to include some of these pages, but I'm not so particular about what type of pages are in there. I just want pages from the actual book. So I'm probably just going to pull a signature from each to start as a base, and I may do 2. So this one I like because I like that it has the cover page. And I'm just going to take a look through here and see what I think about the rest of these pages. Yeah, they're fine for now. I will pull more out at some point. It's probably not going to stay. So I like that this one's down the rabbit hole and advice from a caterpillar. And then maybe we'll do a couple more. Maybe we'll do 1 more each because we need to make some pretty thick signatures. And again, like I said, I'm not going to use all of these papers. I'm just kind of pulling out the ones that I kind of like. So Queen's Croquet, the Garden. Oh, let's do Queen Alice. And again, they don't have to be in order. So I'm going to go this way. And I may go through here and find some more pages that I want to include. But again, I'm not in particularly looking for certain aspects. If you were looking, like if there was a certain story in here that you wanted to include in your book, then you would for sure look for that and pull that out. I'm not really particular about what's going to be in here. I like that this says Queen Alice because it's in my Queen Alice, for my Queen Alice Tarot. But the rest of these pages will probably not be included, so I may need to pull in and out as we go. In general, what I'm trying to do, my goal here is to keep things fairly even because you want your signatures to be fairly even in terms of the number of pages because that will give you a nice even base structure. So basically, I'm just going to make 3 piles and I'm going to... that's where my base is going to start, and then I will start messing with the pages in general from there. Okay, so I'm going to just real quick go through a couple of, I think we had something about the flower garden in this one, if I remember correctly. Maybe we'll put the colored papers on the bottom so it kind of gives me an idea. So the flower garden on that one. And this really is just kind of it's a play. You're not really, oh, this one says Queen Alice, so that one's definitely going in there. There's the Jabberwock, he's pretty cool. It's kind of just a play and to see where we're at, and you know, maybe I think I had the Queen's Croquet. See, this is where I get sidetracked. Nope, this was Queen Alice. And I think I had the garden and the rabbit hole here. And did I had the croquet over here and the caterpillar. So we'll pull that. Anyway, this just gets to be kind of it's kind of a play. You're gonna move pages around. The rest of, I think, these pages and these illustrations I'm gonna hold out, and I will work in as we decorate pages. So I have one there, I have two there, and two there. So maybe we might want, oh, there's the tea party. Let's include the tea party. You know, there's really, at first, when you're first kind of gathering your pages, there's really no rhyme or reason to it, and you will find that you will move things around. This is just to basically give us a base, a starting point. So for some blank journaling pages, a lot of times I'll use like dot grid notebooks, or I'll take journals like this. And as you can see, I've already deconstructed. You can deconstruct a journal the same way we deconstruct a book. And you get these nice journaling pages. You know, I could pull some more of those in as well, but I think for this particular project, what I'm going to do is use kind of some of the stuff that maybe more you might have hanging around your house. So while you certainly can buy a journal and deconstruct it, and I do that a lot of times, my favorite is to like go to Walmart and buy their really cheap journals. They have some lined ones, some dot grid ones. They are all stitch bound. You can just pop the stitches out and, you know, use those, and that works beautifully. But for this project, I'm going to use basic stuff, basic paper. So I'm going to use some notebook paper, and I'm going to use some blank paper. So these will be like my fill-ins to actually create pages that we can journal on. Now, of course, we can journal on, you know, any of the blank papers, and we can also journal on the book pages, and I'll show you how we can do that at the end when we get things put together. But for this process, we'll be primarily using the blank pages. But I usually save those to work into my signatures after I have determined what sort of fancy paper I want to use. So the next step that I usually do at this point is I have, you know, my basic kind of piles going. Now I've got my scrapbook paper. Now for each signature, we need some sort of a base. Now you can use just any sheet of paper to create that outer layer of your signature, right? I mean, you could just totally use one of these, and I could layer papers in between here, and that would work just as well. I like to use scrapbook paper to create the outer shell for each of my signatures because it's sturdier, it's pretty, and I can, being that it's sturdier, I can add pockets and things of that nature to my journal as well. Like this. This is a piece from a calendar. This would not make a good outer layer. I mean, this is not a full sheet, but let's say this one. This would not make a good outer layer because it's really flimsy. So this is not going to hold up really well in terms of, you know, sewing things into it and then gluing it to a binding. And that's a lot of wear and tear. So I like to use scrapbook paper to create basically a cover for my booklet. So you can think of each signature as like a little notebook. So you have 3 little notebooks that you're going to sew together and then glue into a big notebook. So it's basically the process. So I like to use the heavier sheets. So before I start working with weeding my scrapbook paper in as actual pages in my book, I like to pick out 3 pages to use as my covers. Okay, so let's clear all of this away because now we've got a basic a basic idea of what we want to do. So now what I'm going to do is weave in those blank pages for journaling and make sure that I get the same amount of pages or pretty close to it within each signature. But because we've got a big mess here, I'm going to do those one at a time. And really what I'm going to do is just pull out the pages from here that I like, and I'm going to weave in those blank pages to get some more journaling space in here. And then I'll show you what we do with these. So for this one, I mean, I know I definitely want these blank pages because these can definitely still work as journaling pages. So I'm going to fold those in half just so that I have a little bit more working space. So I've got some of those. I've got the plain colors set aside. And I'm going to go through here. I know I want to include these, but I really want to keep these images intact. So I will show you how we're going to bind those together in order to make a full insert out of them. So we'll do that. And now I'm just going to go through here and pull out the pieces of this that I want. So I definitely want this page. And I don't mind part of the contents, but I don't want all of it because that's just a lot. And maybe we'll keep a little bit of the introduction. So I've now removed a huge chunk of pages. I like this page that says Queen Alice. And I would like to find maybe the front of that. And again, this is all like it's totally personal preference in terms of what you want to include in your book. I'm mostly just looking at, I'm not really looking at words. I'm mostly looking at the, I'm not looking at the story, I should say. I'm mostly looking at keywords. So I like this image because this image is very similar to the ones found in the deck. So I'm going to pull that one out. And then here's another one with some great imagery. So I'm going to pull that one out. But this one's kind of nice and it's got a little bit of the rhyme there. Okay. So we're going to pull some of those. So now we've got, let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3 pages. 4, 5, 6. And you'll notice that I'm not counting both sides. This is a single sheet of paper. It's just folded in half. So there's 6. This together will make 7. And we have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we have 12 pages total. And I want to see if there's anything in these single sheets that I might find interesting that I want to include. These will have to be included sideways, which is sometimes interesting. It adds texture. So now we have 30 pages, 30 full spreads, which is going to give me a total of 60 pages. And looking at this, I'm thinking this is not going to be enough, but let's go ahead and start trying to put them together into one booklet and see where we're at. And I'm sure there is like an exact science to this, but of course I don't do it that way. So now basically what I'm going to start doing is kind of layering things in to see what I think. And this one, so we need to put these together. So let's do that first because I can't layer them in until they are together. So and this is where things start getting kind of messy and everything starts overflowing. So basically what I need to do is I need to attach these 2 pages to each other so that I can put them together, so that I can make a spread out of them. So what I'm going to do is first trim off just this jagged part, and then I definitely want this side first, and then we'll go into the Mad Hatter. So what I need to do is basically create a binding between these two. So now to see how big of a binding I need, I'm going to pull one of these. So I'm going to cut that off, and then we're going to go, I want to get this one fairly in the middle of this page. Okay, and so I'm going to trim that one to be down right about there. So now, as you can see, I've layered them so they are now create one page. And as long as I make sure that this portion is in the center, I'm going to be able to sew through this. So at this point, basically what I'm going to do is glue them together. And what I'm going to do is make a mark, which I can erase so that I know where to scoot that line up to. And then I'm going to flip this over, line it back up again, and make a mark on this side as I'm where the page is coming through, because I don't want to glue past that line. The other thing I don't want to do is to put any glue in the center, because I'm going to have to sew through that. So I'm basically just going to make a glue frame, if my glue would behave. Now these, of course, gluing them together just helps them secure to start with. It helps them be secure to start with. But once I sew these in, they'll be secure through the stitching. So I'm just basically gluing just to make sure that I have something that I can work with. And I need to make sure I didn't glue there. So now I have one solid sheet, which I'll be able to fold in half and then trim down to this size. But I'm not going to do that quite yet because I want to give that glue a chance to set. So while we're waiting for that, we're going to go back and start putting these pages together. So generally what I like to do is to kind of group things up. And cut off any raggedy edges. And now it's important to note that you, of course, would not want to trim this, because this is actually the inside and you're going to sew back in here. So just wanted to point that out. I'm sure you probably knew that one, but just in case. So these single sheets that I tore out, I am just going to trim up the edges on those. So then I'm going to fold these in half. And again, I want to look at where do I want them to sit. So I want the rabbit visible. So these are all book pages. These are blank colored pages. And I'm going to fold all these in half. I could put it in here sideways like this, but then you'd be writing across the lines, and sometimes that can be really distracting. And then I'm going to take them as a group, since I don't have a ton of them. Oh, and of course they won't fit in there. So first we're going to trim the height. So I want to make them roughly the same height. And I'm sure there is a proper way to do all of this. And somebody's probably cringing watching this, going, that's not how you do it. But you guys didn't ask how to properly do it, right? You asked how I do it. So this is how I do it. So proper or not, I have no idea. But this is how I go about the process. So now I'm just going to trim off all that excess, so I lose the little holes. And now I have 3 journaling spreads, which will make for some interesting layered effect in the journal. We are going to do with these, I think, so let's see, if we fold in half, I did not cut straight. I'm gonna get, I'm gonna lose a good portion of my of my mushroom, and I want to maintain as much of these mushrooms as I can. So what I'm going to do is actually fold it so where it's not going to be even. I like these mushrooms too. We're going to trim a little bit of this off just so it's not quite so oily for me to work with. So I want to maintain as much of these mushrooms as possible. So I want to maintain these mushrooms. So I'm going to make my fold right about here. And as you'll be able to see, I'm going to get a page that's not quite the same width on either side, and that's okay. But really what I'm trying to do is maintain as much of the imagery as possible. So now you can see here's the front, the inside, and one of these, and these are probably going to get covered up because I'm really not loving the way those look. But we'll cover those up later on. So now we need to determine what do we want to trim off the top. So I want to keep as much of that mushroom as possible. So we're going to go up here and trim there, and then trim here, and that should maintain most of our mushroom on either side. And these don't have to 100% be the same size as the as your main template. I just want to make sure they're not bigger than. So now we have this and this, and they are a little bit bigger than, so I'm going to cut a little bit more off the bottom here. And again, I'm not measuring because it doesn't need to be perfect. And I don't like this raggedy edge, so I'm going to trim that off. And I've made another sheet. Okay, so at this point I have all of my pages folded, and everything is cut to roughly the correct size, but if I need to adjust, I can as I go. So now I need to just basically start putting the little booklet together. So I definitely want this in the front, but I think I want to give some layer to this in between here, then moving into my contents. And for right now, I'm not worrying too much about getting everything like super straight. It just kind of giving me an idea. But I do want a bit of texture there, or a bit of a pop of color. I think I kind of want to pull in some of this. So I am going to cut, I'm just going to cut a strip of this. So I cut that, and it's still chewed up the top of my paper. So we're going to make it work then. It chewed up the top of my paper. Well, fine. We are going to go with a torn top. So there, paper trimmer, take that. Take that, paper trimmer. So those are all put together. This is going to go back around. Okay. Crisis averted. Where is my... That is what I'm missing. I want this one. This is dry now. That's what I'm missing. Okay. Forgot about that. So let's deal with this one real quick. So what we want to do is fold this so that either our seam is, our fold is in the middle or on one side or the other of this. But if I go this way, I'm going to be getting too close to my edge of my image. And I don't want this image to be right on the edge of the book. So I'm going to go in between this seam, hopefully, which is now a little bit difficult to do because it's glued and it wants to bend where the edge of each cutout is. But I am pretty well in the center there. So you can see I have my glued edge there, and then on the inside is a glued edge here. So that takes care of that. And I'm gonna make sure that this one is really nice and flattened, because this does have extra bulk because we have two pages making that one spine. So I'm going to trim this down so that it's the right width. Look close to it. Press it down so it is nice and flat. And again, not really measuring because I don't necessarily need everything to be the same height. So there, now we made a page, a fold for that one. And now that I've done all that, what I want to do is put this one in here, like so. So we're really just, yeah, kind of looking through, playing with the layout here. Seeing what we have in terms of color and design. You know, we definitely want to make sure that we have enough pages to actually write on, to actually function as a journal. Although I will show you how we can turn these book pages into journaling pages as well. Okay. So I think that's good for our first one. I mean, we don't want to get too terribly thick because we got to be able to get a needle and thread through this. So that represents our first grouping done. So I'm just going to tuck a little binder clip on this one because I'm going to need to make the front covers, which I'm going to go ahead and do. I'm going to go ahead and make the front covers and inserts for this one because I want to be able to film that, and you don't want to see me make all 3 signatures because that's just going to take way too long. This is a very time-consuming process. So normally I would go through and I would put all 3 of the booklets, the inside pages of the booklets together, and then go back and make my covers. But I'm just going to do them one at a time for this particular process. This has... and get that. This, now that you can see it here, it's all together. I mean, it's not as tightly bound as it is going to be once I sew it, but it's pretty close. You can see all of this excess here, basically from this front page on, all is going to have to get trimmed off, or it's going to hang out of my book, which is going to be weird and it's going to interfere with my ribbon closure. So what I want to do is make sure that this is at least covering that front section as much as I can get it to, and then maybe go a little bit more so that I can just trim off the excess. And I can either leave this as it is and just have it be shorter, and that's okay because this is the front and this is just going to be, really it's in the middle of the book, because although it's at the back of this first signature, it's going to be butting up against the next signature, the next little booklet inside. So I could totally leave it like this just to be a shorter layer, and that completely works too. So what I'm going to do is kind of just give this a little bend where I want that to fold. But what I need to do is cut this down to size a little bit in terms of the height. So, and I do always go on my covers, I do always go a little, just a tiny bit, like I'm talking a teeny tiny bit, like a centimeter or 2 more than I need, because I'd rather have to trim it off than have it be not short enough or not long enough. So I'm going to trim it right there. Now we'll save this because we'll either use this in a different signature, or we will make a pocket out of it or something along those lines. So this is pretty much done. Now what I basically need to do is repeat the process for the center insert. So now your center insert, if you choose to make one, totally optional, I should mention. because you could just, you know, let the center of the spread be the center of the signature be the center of the signature, and that's totally fine too. I like to do the center inserts because I like to add pockets and places where I can tuck things, and creating a center signature also, or a center folder, sorry, mixing up my words. Creating a center pocket also gives stability when you are sewing. So you want as much stability on the outside of your signature and the inside of their signature, because that's where your needle is going to go in and out. So when you have a heavier paper in there, it just helps to give it that stability that it needs to make sure that the needle doesn't rip the paper. So here is that one completed. So we have our solid signature. I'm going to go ahead and create the other two, because before we can sew this signature together, we need to have all three together, because we have to sew them into the binding as we're sewing them into the booklet. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of the Alice Junk Journal tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.